Okay. Hello? All right. Good morning, everybody. We are ready to begin our Behaviorally Smart Family Dynamics webinar with our guest host. Thank you, Michael Baduzzi, for helping us out here from DaVinci Global Consulting. And this is Behavior DNA's performance and greetings for Behaviorally Smart Family Dynamics.
Well, Trip, I guess I'll take it from here. So thanks to everyone participating on today's call, and of course for you, Massey, Leon Morales, and Trip Rockwell, and the staff at Behavior DNA for the opportunity to speak with you today. What I'd like to do is just briefly mention a little bit about our firm so you have a perspective. My background as formerly as an advisor, I had my own wealth management firm up until 2010. But simultaneous to that work that I was doing, I was also developing some proficiencies in working with families, particularly families that owned operating companies, around consulting around the various areas that were important to each of those different systems. And the name of our company, as Trip mentioned, is DaVinci Global Consulting. And the reason for DaVinci, as the Vitruvian Man symbol exemplifies here, is that it's a way of having human beings interact with the environment around them. And so we're going to be touching on not only just the technical aspects of governance today, the third in a series of presentations, but we're also going to be talking about the human beings that you're going to interact with as you may delve into some of these areas. As for our firm, we work with, like I said, the family business system, and we work in a very systematic approach, and we also work with nonprofits. I'm sure part of the reason you're here today is because you have some specific business objectives you want to accomplish, and some of them are referenced on the screen today. So my hope is that by the time you finish for the next 45 minutes or so, that you will find ways in each of these areas to impact upon your business in a positive way to differentiate yourself in the marketplace. As I said before, we are covering 4 different areas. Today we're covering governance, and our fourth in the series will be our work around businesses and working with family businesses. And so this is basically our structure when we help our clients develop virtual family offices and working with their existing advisory team in order to do that and to position you as an advisor as a key member and core member of the family's advisory team. So when we talk about governance, the topic for today, I'm going to break it up into 6 different areas. And each one of these we won't be able to get into very deeply, but hopefully to the point in which you can gain some information, particularly if these are not areas that you commonly work in. And speaking of that, let's go to our first poll question, Trip.
Perfect. Just a quick poll here, and we'll have several throughout the process, and appreciate your input. First off, which of the following specialties does your firm have expertise in providing assistance to your clients? And please select all that apply, and we will review those once we get a good cross-section available, and we'll see what everyone has to say here momentarily. All right, I think that's a pretty good response here. We'll share the results, and wow, pretty good response there. Lots of people involved in family council. But certainly All aspects fairly well covered, maybe family bank not so much, but obviously family constitution, family meetings and retreats, family employment policies, all well covered here. Anything to add from your end there, Mike?
Trip, we have a great group. Perhaps I can learn as much from them as they can learn from me on this subject. So it's a great group. Thank you. So with that in mind, what we want to do is first take a look at, as we're dealing with these complex structures, it's important to understand what's going on in the mind of the people that we're working with. And so one of the things we want to look at is what's really driving them in their thinking. And so we covered this on the last presentation, but I thought it was worth touching on again. And of course, survival, I think all of our clients are beyond the stage of survival. So the next one, though, is very big, and that is just a sense of belonging and being loved. And if you work with a lot of families, you know that while a matriarch and patriarch may feel that they're giving that type of love and connection with the rising generations in their families, sometimes there's a disconnect there, and even the other way around. So that's really a very strong driving force. And then, of course, this is where more of the money issues come directly into play when we're talking about power and significance and competence. And then we drive into a sense of freedom and autonomy. And then finally, just having fun and being able to learn. And so that comes from choice theory, which is really a neat book that you might want to get and learn about. But as the reason I'm presenting that is because you have to keep in the back of your mind, while maybe many of you on the call are primarily focused on the financial aspect of a family life, you can see that there's many other cross currents that are going on in the minds of the people that we're working with, that whether it's a family office or having a family meeting, really what's going on there. And if we look at that from a little bit different perspective, we, as advisors, a lot of times we're talking about transferring knowledge and evaluating things and giving recommendations and applying the skills that we have that our clients don't have. And so, as you would think, people are hiring advisors because they're looking for that cognitive expertise. And of course, if you think about it from the medical field, you have general practitioners, and then you have specialists. And the specialists are really the ones that make the most money because they're in just such great demand, because people need to rely on that high level of expertise. But generally, specialists don't take the time to look into other areas outside of their expertise. So maybe some of you are on the call are starting to think about, now that you're a specialist, how do you do some work a little bit as a general practitioner? And how do you get value in return for that type of work? The second area is the affective, or our personality, or how we feel about things, our emotions, our values, our motivations. And you can start to see that, and we'll look at it a little bit more carefully in a moment, but these are starting to become areas where specialists in the financial realm tend to, or even in accounting or law for that matter, tend to start shying away. They really don't want to get too involved in people's personalities and the emotional aspect of things. They would prefer things just to be all logical and let's kind of leave the emotions out. And then, of course, the third area is in the cognitive, which is how people prefer to act. Because some of our clients are very detailed-oriented, some are bottom line, some like change and innovation where others want to move away from that. So as we start talking about delving into these areas, advisors need to start thinking in terms of integrating how people think in these three areas. Another way to look at this might be in a ladder of progression. I might use the term maturity, maybe in some respects, but it's a starting place to where you eventually want to get to. So if you look at this from just an advisor's perspective, of course, our clients are coming to us for knowledge. They're coming for us to analyze that knowledge, evaluate the knowledge. And it says persuasion. I would say commitment would be a better way of putting that, in getting to a point of vision that the client, to bring vision to the client's situation. So, but that really addresses just the cognitive area. When you start to look at these other areas, that's where the complexity starts coming into play as we start dealing with human beings that are interacting with this technical aspect of what advisors do and what advisors bring to the table. And it starts to require, just like in the financial profession, it starts to require different skill sets. And so as you think about these types of areas, you have to think in terms of where is that skill set going to come from. And of course, you could go from one extreme to the other. One extreme, you either become those people through an investment in your own education. You can hire the talent, bring it in-house. And on the other end of the spectrum, you can partner with other firms that are specialized in those areas but don't have conflicts of interest with what you do or compete with you do, but enhance what you do. In a sense, that's what DaVinci is as a firm. So let's start talking about family governance and what it is just from a foundational standpoint. And so the first thing is stewarding family principles, missions, and the visions of the family members. And so stewarding connotates something a little bit different than mandating or having matriarch and patriarchs mandate what it is that the family principles and missions should be. And that's one of the first obstacles sometimes advisors and all of us will encounter as we start working with not only the matriarch and patriarch, but we're starting to bring in these other family members. And I use the word principles instead of values here because one of the difficult issues in working with families, as those of you, it seems like most of you, if not all of you, have in these different levels, is to understand that each family member may have different values. There might be even different spiritual values or convictions, but really it comes down to what are the core principles, things that all members of the family can agree on, or put a different way is what does it mean to be a member of the Smith family? What does that mean? The other thing is informing people about what's going on, not keeping them in the dark, which is so commonplace and causes so many problems, which we'll touch on later. Of course, it's just the rules of engagement. How do we go about the interplay between generations and members instead of the hierarchy structure, which is so commonplace, where mom and dad really dictate all the terms to the rising generations, and really the only ones that are even allowed to be to express their wishes, their desires, their dreams. And then vitally important is communication. And for those of you that have done this type of work, you know the importance of good communication skills, not only on our part, but to teach that to the people that we're working with so that they can open these lines of communications to overcome some of the fears and other issues that drive behavior. And then, of course, pardon me, it's to allow a decision-making process to exist where there's a forum for people to bring their discussions instead of doing it anecdotally throughout, perhaps at Christmas time or Thanksgiving when people are trying to celebrate family and traditions, instead of bringing up business matters there where fights start to break out. So it's a process that they have in place. So that's kind of the foundational approach to why we are talking about family governance. Now what I'd like to do is, the purpose of family governance is to address 6 different family capitals. And sometimes people have said 5 capitals, some have, I've seen as many as 8, but generally speaking, this covers the waterfront. And so each of these capitals, the purpose of the family governance is to enrich these, to promote, to grow these, and for the family to enjoy these. And of course, each one has a unique aspect to it. In the spiritual area, it's not just the belief system, but it's, what is our calling, our purpose in life, our guiding beliefs. And then we go into these other areas. And if you notice, one thing about this from a financial perspective is only about 50%, or 3 out of the 6, more directly relate to money, whereas another 3 don't relate that much to money. So again, what we're doing is talking about holistically bringing value to the family in all 6 of these family capitals, because the quality of their life and their family life is going to be directly related to the success they have in growing and capturing these different capitals. So we looked at the first instrument that many families go to is the family constitution. And it starts out with more or less the preamble is what are we doing this for? What's the objective? Now I want to be quick to say that my experience is that some families struggle with this issue of governance and things such as developing family constitutions. And again, it has to do with how they're wired. An example for me is that one particular family that the patriarch, was just 100% sold on the desire to have a more formal family constitution and governance system. The matriarch really was not on board with that. And candidly, some of the children had different issues. One in particular, this is a family of faith, and one of the daughters-in-law that was self-conscious and had issues around having people help her financially. And so there was an issue she had with this whole idea of stewarding the family wealth because of her life story and some of the issues that she was involved with. So this human dynamic of human beings that's interfacing with these tools and these techniques, you have to be very conscious of, on paper it looks all great, and if you're a very structured person, a very logical person, you yourself might say, gee, there's 100 reasons why families should want to do this type of work, and they should do it exactly the way you've developed it. But keep in mind that you're going to have to interview and talk to these people as individual human beings with their own passions, drives, way of doing things, way of thinking. So, but whether it's a formal or informal family constitution, these would be some of the discussion points. And again, it could be put in writing in a very formal way, or it can just be put in an outline or some general way of doing it. But each of these components are important. So, and I put values there. Again, I would recommend principles in number 2 maybe be used. And this idea of expectations, to do pre-interviews with families, and not necessarily just one, but maybe having multiple discussions to understand what each of their expectations are as they go through this process. And it's better to find out there, and I'll give a story in just a minute about how it kind of played out. Well, I'll do it actually now. Might as well do it now. So I'm in a family meeting, a family council meeting, and they were just developing it. And so the mom and dad were very proud of the investment they made, and we were going through this process. And what happened was that there was just a pushback. And so instead of pushing forward, all we did was say, what is it that you would really feel that you all agree on, that you'd like to focus, our work on? And so what we found out was the family philanthropy was an area that all of them had a very common interest and were passionate about. And so we kind of took a roundabout way of working on it, where we kind of went into more of a philanthropic discussion and then came back to family constitution once they saw that this type of structure helps promote and develop the family philanthropic efforts and desires. So leadership structure roles would have to do with if there's a family office involved, the family foundation, other types of leadership other than the family council. It also take into account things such as committees that you can get family members involved with, where they're not actually voting members of the family council, but they're involved in the process. And then we talk about, involving everybody. There's a place for everybody to have some way of contributing, and that's very important to the process. Once we get those set up, we're talking about different types of things, such as family agreements. What happens at the marriage and divorce of family members? What about employment policies? How are family members compensated if they're involved in the family? What about family loans and investments, which we'll talk on in the family bank? Of course, there's just the management of the portfolio and how we can collectively put all our money together for the advantage of aggregating resources. One of the topics I find that families also really like to talk about is what's the vision for the upbringing and education and development of the children from the family perspective. You have to be careful, of course, because you don't want to usurp the parents' rights to be able to make those decisions, but at least from a supporting standpoint, or how can the families support the parents in that type of respect. Of course, what's the long-term vision for succession planning of the family business? And of course, the big elephant in the room, of course, is the dissension that may exist or the conflicts that may exist within family members, and how do we resolve that? You also have where family members don't behave nicely, or you have leaders of the business that are not good leaders, and there has to be a process for the family to be able to evaluate and make decisions around those difficult areas. And then, of course, there's just the person who's going to be in charge of taking care of the notes, the family history, and hopefully there would be some orientation process. A family north of where I am here have a multi-week orientation program that they bring all family members through on a coming-of-age basis. And so they are very oriented as to what it means to be a member of that particular family, and the pride and the tradition that comes from over 100 years of being in business together. So one of the things that you're probably aware of is that there's the business. And my experience has been that usually one spouse is a strong advocate for one of those systems, whereas another spouse is an advocate for the different approach. Whichever spouse it may be, traditionally in the South, it tends to be the patriarch is more of the business-oriented influence, but it obviously varies around that type of thing. But usually there's some work that needs to be done between the spouses because of these different issues that are related here of how a family looks at something. One spouse sees the children as being, just accepted as they are, and they don't have to do anything to be loved. It's unconditional love. Where in a business setting, there has to be some level of productivity, of course, involved. So that's an issue that's good for advisors to work with prior to, developing some of these things we're talking about. So what does a family console do? What does it accomplish? Well, I think the most important thing, it's a way to teach or convey ways of doing things, successful, I guess you could say wisdom, to rising generations just by the way the family operates. So it provides a thinking environment for people to be able to have sounding boards and brainstorming activities to where people are contributing to the success and the human capital and the intellectual capital of other members of the family. We're going to talk about an interesting way to approach that in a minute. Then there's just the structures for decision making. I have one family that loved this because their adult children were really in a pattern of making unwise decisions. And so when they started this process and the rising gen members started to see the value they could get in this, they really turned around how these young people were making decisions in their life, particularly around business, and was a very effective way of doing that was non-threatening. And then, of course, just how do you adapt to change? What's the vision? Some people are easier to adapt to change where others aren't, so you need to have a process to bring everybody together on the same page. And then just, how do you take action, and how do you manage the projects of the family, and who's monitoring those steps? And then, of course, communicating between family members is just vitally important. If you are a member of a family that owns a business, how easy it is for people to feel that they're left in the dark and they're left out, and there's some resentment that builds as a result of that. where everyone would be better off if there are better lines of communication. So those are a few things about what does a family accomplish. And as I mentioned earlier, is that as you start dealing with more and more people, and this is just a handful of people where obviously some of you may have dealt with members of families that are 50 or 100, where it really becomes a lot more challenging to deal with. And so it's very important, and I guess I would contrast it here. Sometimes I'm meeting with advisors and they say, well, I do family meetings all the time, and when I ask them, what does that mean? They say, well, what we do is we develop the estate plan with mom and dad. Mom and dad want to explain the estate plan to the kids, so we bring the kids in the room. We have a few-hour meeting where what we do is present technically how we've developed the plan, and it's really just conveying the information to the family members, and we ask anybody if they have any questions, and so that's basically the family meeting we have. Well, I was talking to one advisor that took that approach, and they were telling me about how in the middle of the presentation, one of the sons kind of jumped up and he said, I appreciate mom and dad and all that you're doing, but to tell you the truth, I really don't care about your money, and I don't really want your money to control and dictate my life. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to New York and I'm having a sex change operation. And I know you don't know that. It's taking you by surprise. But, I think I just need to leave now. So, I mean, there are situations, that's an extreme situation, one of the most extreme I've heard. But I think that's why it's so important to do things like to really prepare in advance these people for having conversations and really defining what it is instead of just distributing information, for example, like that was, is really to have more interaction and to understand the expectations of each of these people going in there. And as one consultant put it, which I thought was good, is a consultant going into this should really have a grasp to understanding what the end result it should be and what we're striving for. And the only way to do that is to really engage with these individual members ahead of time and understand where they're coming from and their expectations and the issues so that you could address those things before they get in the room together. So let's talk about the benefits of family meetings and retreats. And for me, retreats are just, more time where we integrate more fun activities, whether they're fun for fun's sake or fun for learning's sake, and really spend more time and go into greater depth. Oftentimes they're around a particular topic if the family's doing these on a regular basis. But, and then the other thing about family meetings is usually, you don't just have one family meeting, for example. So you have an initial family meeting to start just opening discussions, but we'll talk about then how you branch out and you further develop those family meetings, because it's impossible within one or maybe even two family meetings to really drive the benefits of the things we're talking about here, which is effective communication process. 95%, and probably that's understated, of the families I meet with, the people in the families have never been trained on effective ways to effectively communicate to one another. Once they get that, that opens up a panacea of benefits for the family. To manage family relationships. Just this morning, I had a family member send out an email to a number of other family members, really out of an emotional issue that they were having, instead of really following the process we set to have open dialogue and open discussion about things. So managing family relationships are vitally important. Resolving conflict in ways that don't drive people to separate, but bring people together, and how you can bring that to a point where you can cause greater love to exude in the family once they resolve these difficult conversations and they see a path to success. Preserving the traditions of the family, the histories of the family is very important to this process. And as a result, it results in these stronger family ties where people are really starting to see that there are threads that carry through the generations and they're part of that thread. And the importance to their life of having strong families for themselves as well as they think about their future generations. Of course, there are things relating to ownership and participation in the business and how the succession plan, and that results in building stronger businesses. And of course, finally, it's just helping the children with managing and stewarding the family wealth, and what does that mean, and how can their desires be satisfied while still perpetuating family wealth for future generations. I thought I would throw up a slide here. It's getting difficult to read, but these are going to be available to you. Sometimes people ask, what are some basic topics that I might explore with families around a family meeting? And so some of the common ones are listed here. Of course, each of these areas could have multiple meetings around each one and delve into different aspects. On a philanthropic basis, for example, we have a philanthropic type of program for families that takes them through 25 steps of philanthropy, and it's quite a detailed process. So that's the more formal, and we can go to, obviously you could develop it on a more informal basis. So what about the thinking environment that we want to create for a family? So I want to refer you to a book. It's called Time to Think by Nancy Kline, K-L-I-N-E. It's a terrific book, and if you're really serious about this type of work, I think it's an essential book for you to have. But what she does is she talks about what is the environment that families need to have in place for them to have these thriving family meetings. So one of the things she's talking about, and I'm not going to go into obviously great depth here, one is attention. And this is powerful no matter whether it's one-on-one or in a group, and that is attention where you're focusing and you're looking in the eyes of the person that's speaking to you. They will turn away because that's a natural way people think, but if they know that you're engaged with them and that you are giving them time to express themselves, that you're not thinking about how you're going to respond to them, but really just sitting there out of curiosity to understand them. That is such a gift and so powerful. And once they get that gift, they want to give it back to people. The idea of equality, and that is that in a patriarchal type of society or system, obviously there are people that are older, that control wealth, that are more powerful. But when it comes to a family meeting, one of the things to convey is that we're all equal as thinkers in the room, that there is not this hierarchy that exists when you're in with the people trying to communicate. Another one is just ease. Urgency kills and ease releases into new possibilities. It's just to be able to know that we only have 2 hours, we're only doing this family meeting one time, we're never going to do it for another year. That's the type of urgency that will really diminish what comes out of a meeting. Think of it this way, where do you get your best ideas? It's in the shower, right? Or maybe before you're about to go to sleep at night. When you're at rest, when you're at peace, and that sense of ease brings freedom to your thinking. Then there's encouragement instead of criticism. A time to look and encourage people with what they have and where they're going. And there's many ways to show that in appreciation that you express for people. What we do is at the end of every meeting, we do a round of appreciation, and that's where everybody has to speak up, and they have to give a genuine, authentic expression of appreciation to someone or some group of people that were in the room that went through the process. It could be ideas that were exchanged, empathy that was expressed, compassion, or what have you. Then feelings. And I think most of you on the call have heard of something called the limbic hijack, where there's a triggering word. This happens oftentimes in families where you have these bombs that people let go, and as you interview people beforehand, one of the things is to get to the root and understanding what are those triggers that happen, but being able to help people cope and manage their feelings within a meeting without them feeling compelled to have to run out. And if the tensions rise, to be able to take a time out and to understand that. Because as those of you who have done, extensive work in family meetings, sometimes you're walking on the precipice of an area where, you're just about to where everything might fall apart if things get out of hand. And so it does take some experience and ability and skills in these particular areas of human behavior to be able to navigate and weave through those difficult issues that come up. The other is that everybody has the same information. Oftentimes you find in patriarchal families that, maybe the mom and dad have the information, but the rising gen or other people don't. And so it's very difficult to think well when only some people have data and information. Diversity is also very important. We all like, we see the world, if we come across people that are like us, then we kind of think they're great people, because since they're like us and we're great people, they have to be great people. But as you probably know, that really synergy comes from diversity. And most businesses that I go in and I'm consulting with tend to hire people that are just like them. And as a result, there's these strong biases that exist in business where diversity would get them a better outcome. But sometimes people are afraid of that diversity unless they understand the value that it brings and understand human dynamics and behavior ahead of time. Kind of coming to an end here, a big aspect of this work is asking incisive questions. And that is, we all have a perspective. We see the world through our box, so to speak, our life experiences. If we were with adults when we were growing up and they were untrustworthy, we might take that lack of trust into adulthood. And so we come to assumptions based on those life experiences, and those become our belief systems. And so an incisive question is one that says, if that belief system or that assumption isn't true, how would that change your thinking? And it doesn't matter whether or not it is or it isn't true. It matters, let's start thinking about things from a different perspective. And that opens a panacea of possibilities and opportunities and broadens a person's way of thinking about something. And then finally is the place that you're having these meetings. And that is, if you're meeting in the family business, in the conference room, you're meeting at the matriarch and patriarch's home, those carry with it certain meaning. Meaning mostly is you're at a place where somebody else controls things. So you want to get to a place where the people that come don't have that feeling. And most importantly, it's a quality place. Because if you meet in the back room of some restaurant, that's going to convey a certain message versus if you meet at a very high quality place, that conveys the message that, you matter as a person, that we are serious about what we're doing. We want to get above the everyday life and go to a higher place to have a thoughtful place. So these are some hopefully keys that you could take again from Nancy Klein's book, and there's many other things that are valuable in that. But this will give you a good idea of how to create that robust and interesting environment where you get the outcomes that everyone's hoping to get. So let's go to poll question number 2, Trip.
All right, everybody, just keep us on our toes. How many family meetings have you facilitated over the last 2 years that involve Gen 1 and Gen 2 members? So let us know how that worked for you, and we'll get a good cross-section of responses here. And I think that's pretty good there. We'll close them up and share the results. And wow, kind of, well, more than 3. Certainly the majority have gone above and beyond, which is fantastic, but still then evenly distributed amongst some of the other options. But certainly the feel is that the more the merrier. The more times more touch points you have with folks, and the more folks that are involved in the process, the better. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Trip. Yeah, again, reiterating the fact that we have a sophisticated group of people that are working in this area, so that's good. So another area just to touch on is family employment policies. Of course, this is one of the big issues because what you're doing with the family council is starting to have that communication place where you bring the family system together with the business system, and that's really where you have those kinds of discussion and one of the main values of having a family council. And so employment policies are one of the issues, of course, that family councils really must deal with effectively, and where many of the problems in family business reside when families don't have this. So overall, what you want to have is you want to have a philosophy. So this would be such things as, that the family wants to attract qualified people, that it's maybe not a birthright to be an employee, that once you're hired, you're treated like any other employee, that there's no guarantee that you'll be promoted or that you'll even get a job, or that the family has to carry you because you're not performing well just because you're a family member. So those would be some of the things in the philosophical area that you might want to talk about. Secondly is that you're only hiring people when there is an open position. It's not that just when little Johnny graduates college that we're going to make room for him in the family business. Then there's prerequisites for qualification. So obviously, many of these policies, you want to have the children work outside of the family. I've seen many family policies around this where they have to have been promoted 1 or 2 times, or they have to have had 3 raises in their position before they can come back and to be considered for the family business. So, and even an age limit, there are some situations where somebody that's 45 or 55 years old, is just not as successful as they want to be, and they think they want to come back in the family to coast into retirement and to have a better opportunity. So some of these policies will restrict people in some form or fashion from coming back without maybe meeting other criteria. And then as far as specifics are concerned, then that's where you get down into such things as the interview process and how decisions are made and who's going to be making the decisions, and why family members shouldn't be upset when their child doesn't get hired because they follow this definitive plan and they have an objective way to show why the person maybe was not hired. Compensation, many plans say, you're going to be compensated based on periodic reviews and performance and be treated as non-family members. And then, of course, there are other things you could put in about internships and other things along that way. So not really rocket science here, but it's just a matter that every family is going to be different, and every family should be thinking about this, and there's no one way, just like it is for any of these things, there's no one way to do this. Lastly, let's touch on, well, there's 2 things left to do, the family bank. Here, what I've found is most parents want to have some mechanism in place that, if warranted, that they want to support their children financially. Sometimes I also see this where a patriarch who is the owner of a business who needs to exit or transition, one of the big things of the exit and transition is for them to develop beforehand something that is significant for them to do after transitioning, not to go out and play golf every day or to hang around the house type of thing. And actually, statistically, about half of the deals to sell businesses fall through at the signature table because people don't have a vision of what's next in life, and they don't want to let go of their significance and people wanting of their importance. So what obviously you want to do through all of these processes is help them develop what's the next chapter, and that the next chapter, how can it be better than the former chapter? And in many times I've seen where business owners want to start giving back and actually investing in startups and doing some venture capital work. And so they do that sometimes with their children, be involved in that process. So it could be where you're funding by making a loan to a family member, or it can be some other form of LLC or other family structure where the generations participate together. So obviously that is involved in the philosophy here. You see down at the bottom, adopt the Rothschild model, where many of you may have heard about the Rothschild-Vanderbilt story. But Rothschild put all of his sons in business and banking in Europe, with the idea being that they all had to share what was going on in their communities with each other. And because of the sharing of all of this knowledge and information, it made for a much stronger family and much stronger family business for them individually and collectively. So you have the basic organization. How are you going to set this up? Most of them are informal, non-regulated. But you do have private family banks that are structured and more formal and incorporate this. It's set up in the family office structure. And then you have, what kind of meetings you're going to have. Usually these are a component of the family council meetings, but you also have special meetings. You have advisory boards made up of professional advisors, business consultants, and things that can validate that what is being proposed makes sense for everyone. Obviously, you have a funding scheme and then a way to process the loan once it's been validated that there is a valid business plan and it makes sense for the young people. And if it doesn't, then to mentor and coach them into how to build stronger business plans and how to come back with a better way to get the funding that they want, and also, of course, be more successful. And then there's, just the application itself and how is that processed, and go through approval process and determine whether or not it's valid for funding. So that's kind of just a little bit of information. Again, it's across the board as to what these look like. And then lastly, what I want to do is, and I'm going to share kind of actually what we do. You may know that there's groups like Trusted Family that for a considerable amount of money provide back office support for family offices, and not just for the family office executives and staff, but also in advisors, but also for the families themselves. So in this case, we set up two. We set up first the family office, and over on the right where I highlighted shows you what all of the areas of things that they have access to as far as the family office is concerned. And then they, of course, have roles and responsibilities, and they have various different access depending upon who you are interacting with this. The beauty of this system, for those of you that know 365, the actual technology cost is, as low as $5 a month. Where the cost does come in is, designing it and maintaining the structures. There's some cost around that type of thing, which the family can do some, and our firm does some. So it varies depending upon the client's existing family office and resources and competencies. And then we set up a separate, I just kind of put this on the same sheet, but we set up a family site which only involves family members. In this case, the family has a lodge and they needed to have, they let other people use it, and they want to have, where do people go to get, what do you do when you get to the lodge, what do you do when you leave the lodge, resources and so forth for people, calendars for booking the lodge, and in other areas, photos, documents, and all the things that you're familiar with from these various types of vendors that offer this. So I think the main point to communicate here is your clients, these wealth holders, one of the things in this age of constant change, and you probably heard this quote that's kind of become more popularized now, where I believe it was the chairman of IBM said, business is faster than it's ever been before, and it'll never be this slow again. So what we have to do is help our wealth holders and our clients be able to deal with complexity, to deal with change, and the only way to do that is to collaborate at a high level. As you know, clients just don't have the time to meet one-on-one and get into really deep conversations and intimacy with each advisor one at a time. It has to be brought together collectively, and it'd be more powerful for both the client and the advisor. So with that being said, and looking at the clock, I just want to leave you with one last thing. Da Vinci is launching in September something new, which does involve advisors. And what this is, it's a called Rising Leaders Forum, and it's basically a organization where groups of rising generations come together to learn about how to steward the family wealth and steward the family business. And so it's so to speak, it's a prerequisite course that goes through 27 topics, brings world-class subject matter experts to bear, and part of the process involves bringing in advisors, we call a professional advisory board, to go over some of the technical aspects that these rising gents, some of them will be working in the business, some aspire to work in the business, but it's a training ground which removes the burden from mom and dad from having to do that and puts it into the hands of high-level people we call deans. If you're familiar with Vistage, they have chairs, we have deans, but it's also, we don't just work with the rising gen, but we integrate the patriarch and matriarch, the business leaders, the family office executives, so that it's a common experience that's very powerful and very dynamic. And so the other thing, the bottom line of this, without going into great detail, it's for these rising gens to not only learn about business, not only learn about family, but also to learn the wisdom it takes to live an abundant, fulfilling life of purpose and passion. And so we're launching this. And so one of the poll questions has to do with just your thinking about a program like this. So with that being said, let's go to poll question number 3, Trip.
Wrapping things up, to what degree do you think your firm would be interested in being a member of Rising Leader Forum's Professional Advisory Board? So we'll get some input on that. And
yeah, this is not a solicitation, I will say. This is just, we wanted to get a feel as we approach this as to whether or not advisors would see this as something that they would find value in from that perspective. So there's no commitment on anybody's part here. It's just a kind of a survey. So if you go ahead forward with that poll.
You pretty much have a captive audience here, Mike. I think everybody is at least interested in hearing more about that.
Okay,
so
well,
that,
maybe what we could do.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Trip. I was saying, maybe we could have maybe another session down the road about that topic if people are interested. Sure. So with that being said, let's go ahead and open it up. We have just 5 minutes for some Q&A. So why don't we open up the floor for that?
And while we wait for anyone to post any questions they may have, quick spring house cleaning here is this piece has been recorded, so it will be made available to everyone after it's processed here. Also, that being the third of 4 meetings, everyone that has joined maybe late, you'll have access to the earlier 2, but also be pre-enrolled to the 4th and final one coming up next month. So the recording, the handouts, the poll questions, the survey, a copy of the presentation itself, plus the earlier pieces, all that is readily available just simply from registering. So without any further ado, we'll go ahead as time runs out here and give everyone back to their day. And you'll hear from us shortly with the final piece to review on your own.
Thanks,
Mike, any
thanks
closing
everybody.
statements?
Just thanks to the